Well, hello everybody. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy, and we are preparing to do episode 12 today. Episode 12, the question is, how long did it take for the government to decide Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty? In episode 11, we went through the arrest of, well, began with the arrest of Oswald, and then Jack Ruby's role in cleaning up the mess, which the conspirators knew that if there was ever a trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, there was just too much risk of him saying something or other witnesses saying something or other evidence turning up. So it was just better to make sure that he wasn't alive so there'd be no trial. And the evidence is pretty overwhelming, even at the very beginning. And of course, we're going to add to that evidence as time goes on. More and more gets added to it. But evidence is pretty overwhelming that Jack Ruby was connected to the mob. Jack Ruby was connected to the CIA. Jack Ruby was essentially a hired hand, and he, based on the stalking that he did of Lee Harvey Oswald in the days and hours after the assassination, and then his response or his physical reaction after he'd shot him, was waiting to find out if he'd actually killed him. Some anecdotal evidence to be sure, but then there were witness statements about him having foreknowledge of the assassination itself. We're going to establish later that not only did he have foreknowledge, he was involved in the planning. So it's pretty clear that Jack Ruby is part of a larger plot, which was the original question we were seeking to answer. And he had a role to play, and his role to play was to clean it up. And if he didn't complete that, he didn't take care of it satisfactorily, he knew what fate awaited him. And everything was going to plan. Of course, he goes to jail, and initially he's convicted and he's sentenced to death, but his conviction is later thrown out on appeal. And the judge says, as long as you will talk in the second trial. And Ruby assured him that he would. And in fact, he had asked the Warren Commission if the Warren Commission would take him to Washington in '64, right after the assassination. He said, I'll tell you anything you want to know. You got to get me to Washington. You can't leave me here in Dallas. I'm not safe here. So he had offered to talk previously, and the Warren Commission just laughed at him basically and said, no, we're not a law enforcement agency. We're just here to ask you questions. We don't have any place to keep you, et cetera, et cetera. So they left him in Dallas, and he was found guilty, sentenced to death. The appeal overturned the conviction. And then as soon as he promised to talk, a month later, he was dead of cancer. So that was yesterday. Today, the question is, how long did it take for the government to decide Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty? I've got two pictures here. On the top, it's an autograph picture you can see above the Assistant Attorney General, Nicholas Katzenbach. He's meeting with LBJ in this picture. Nicholas Katzenbach is going to be a major player unwittingly. It wasn't supposed to be this way. It was a leak, and ended up being pretty embarrassing to him and to the government in general. But so we're going to talk about his role in answering this question. And also down below, the district attorney of New Orleans, of Dallas, actually, named Henry Wade. You can see he's holding court there. This is after Lee Harvey Oswald has died, so there is no trial, which means he doesn't have a case to bring. But he's holding a press conference anyway because he is fulfilling his part of the bargain, which is to convince the media, and ergo the United States population, that Lee Harvey Oswald would have been convicted if there had been a trial. Pretty interesting, the timing of all of this at the beginning of the investigation, not at the end. In fact, there has really been no investigation at all. The events happened so quickly. The investigation, I guess, would begin into Lee Harvey Oswald on the day he's charged, which is the 23rd. But by the 24th, he's dead. And and then these guys are coming out convicting him in the court of public opinion on the 25th, basically saying, well, oh, well, no trial, but he would have been convicted. So there's been no investigation. But anyway, we'll get into that. So those are two prominent individuals in today's discussion: Nicholas Katzenbach, the attorney, the assistant attorney general, and Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas. All right, so here's where Nicholas Katzenbach gets himself in a little bit of trouble. He wrote a memo, and that memo, included in that memo, which got leaked, and it was printed in the newspapers for all the American people to see. And in that memo, he said, quote, "The public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large, and that evidence was such that he would have been convicted at trial." This is alarming, to say the least. Before an investigation has even begun, Lee Harvey Oswald's body is still warm in the grave, and Nicholas Katzenbach is sending the word down the line. Okay, Oswald was the assassin. That's our starting point. He didn't have any help. There's no conspiracy. That's number two. Number three, if there had been a trial before he died, he would have been convicted. Those are the marching orders coming straight from the Attorney General's office. Now, of course, you remember Bobby Kennedy is the Attorney General at this time, but he has largely shut down. He's just constantly, after the death of his brother, he feels responsible, and we'll discuss why he feels responsible. He's trying to attend to Jackie. He basically just shut down as far as his job was concerned and quit. He really went on a mission, personal mission, to find out who did it. And Nicholas Katzenbach really was running the Justice Department at this time. So here he is giving marching orders. Number one, this is not ambiguous here. He is saying it. Oswald was the assassin, and he didn't have any Confederates. There's no conspiracy, and he would have been convicted. And this is an effort to convince people down the line that they should make every effort to follow this template. And in every public statement, they should include these 3 points. And that eventually, if enough people say it enough times, the public will buy it. That's the whole point of this. And so it appears when this memo gets leaked that the fix was in from the beginning. And that any investigation was not an honest investigation. It was actually, an honest investigation starts with you just follow the evidence where it leads, and eventually you come up with a conclusion. You might start off with a theory, you might start off with a hypothesis, just like the scientific method, but you have to prove it. Just like in the scientific method, you have to be able to replicate it over and over and over again, be able to call it a fact or a scientific fact. Same thing with a criminal case. You have to follow the evidence where it leads. You have to be able to, the evidence has to stand up to scrutiny, and then you can arrive at a conclusion. And even then, it's not 100%, because if it's a jury trial, you never know what the jury's going to, but your job is to convince that jury. But they're saying, we don't have to worry about that. So the evidence doesn't have to stand up to any scrutiny, especially because we don't have to worry about any of the evidence that might have been exculpatory. We just won't release that. So we'll just release the incriminating evidence and let the court of public opinion decide that he's guilty. And we'll help that court of public opinion along with all of our public statements. Then we get to Henry Wade. Henry Wade got the memo from Nicholas Katzenbach, and he calls a press conference. And his job would have been to try Lee Harvey Oswald in a Dallas courtroom. So he ostensibly has the evidence, and he's the guy people want to hear from. And so right after Oswald's death, and he's gotten his marching orders, he calls this press conference, and he lists for the press 15 reasons why he believes the Oswald case is closed. That's how he started his press conference. The Oswald case is closed and he is guilty. Now, he doesn't have any of the evidence with him. He can't support anything he's saying with any evidence, because all the evidence has been taken by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, and it's been flown to Washington. So Henry Wade has no evidence of anything he's saying. He's just saying it. And all the evidence is in DC. So what are the 15 reasons? He starts off now. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and be the poor man's version of a defense attorney, and you'll see how easy this case can fall apart. If I can pick it apart, anybody can. All right. Reason number one: witnesses said they saw Lee Harvey Oswald at the sixth floor depository window. Okay, if I'm the defense attorney, I say, well, where does Lee Harvey Oswald work? And the witness on the stand said, well, he works at the Texas School Book Depository. What is his workstation? Well, he works on the sixth floor. As an employee who was stationed on the sixth floor, would he have any reason to be in front of any of the windows on the depository, on the Elm Street side of the depository? And of course, the answer to that would be yes. He worked the entire floor. So just because you saw him at the sixth floor depository window does not mean that, you know, he was in a place where he wasn't supposed to be. That was his job. All right. And that's besides the point. Trying to nail down these witnesses. Was it, you know, you were looking from the ground level. Are you sure it's who you saw? It's pretty hard to see 6 floors up, especially into a sunny sky, through window panes and be able to definitively say who you saw. All right, but that's another angle you could take. Point number two: Oswald's palm print was found on the rifle. We learned yesterday how that happened. All right, in episode 11. If you remember, if you didn't watch episode 11, his dead body was in the morgue, and the FBI showed up with the rifle and fingerprinting kit, and they asked Paul Grudy to leave. And when Paul Grudy came back, his hands were all oiled up, and it was on the cuffs of his shirt. Paul Grudy had to take his shirt off and clean his hands, clean his wrists, put a new clean shirt on him, put a new clean jacket on him, get him ready for burial. And then the next day, the FBI, which had already confessed or announced that they could not find any fingerprints or palm prints on the rifle, the next day after that little funeral home visit, they announced that they found a palm print. All right. So all I do is I put Paul Grudy on the stand, say, tell me what you know, Mr. Grudy. And he's going to tell that same story. Point number three: Oswald's palm print was on a box near the 6th floor window. There you see the so-called sniper's nest after the cops got, this is the picture that they took. And you see that on that box right there in front, there's a left palm print. And then there was a right-hand palm print on another box. Again, this was his workstation. If you look at the description of his job description, he carried boxes, he stacked boxes, and he loaded boxes or packed boxes. So it stands to reason if you find there's probably a bunch of boxes in the 6th floor that have his palm print on them. That doesn't mean anything. Okay. Point number four: the paraffin tests on Oswald's hands indicated he could have fired a gun that day. They used the word gun because they were trying to convince the American people that he was the guy who did it. If they put pistol or 38, no one's going, you know, because he did have some dots of nitrates on his hands. Not enough that would conclusively say that he fired a handgun that day. But there were some nitrates. Could have been explained by the boxes he was toting around or the books with the ink on them. Nevertheless, they used the word gun. They could not use rifle because that part of the test came up clean. He had no nitrates on his face, on his cheek, on his neck, or on his shoulder. So they just used the euphemism gun to try to blur it a little bit. But I would ask, if I was a defense attorney, I'd ask for the paraffin test that showed that he did not fire a rifle. And case is dismissed at that point. You can't charge him with murder of the president if he conclusively did not fire a rifle. And that's what the test showed. So they would introduce the paraffin test. The Henry Wade, as district attorney, if he introduced the paraffin test, he would do so at his own peril, because I would know as a defense attorney that he did not, the paraffin test cleared him of the rifle shot. All right, point five: the Italian rifle had been purchased by Oswald using the alias hideout. Okay, they got receipts that show that he purchased this Mannlicher Carcano, and he used an alias to do it. And the alias is his because when he was arrested, he had two IDs, one of them being Heidel. So clearly he purchased the rifle. Doesn't mean he shot the president. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that that's his rifle. That leads us to point 6. Oswald had ID with the name Heidel, which he did. Again, that doesn't mean he shot anybody. 7, Oswald was seen by police in the depository after the shooting. Yes, he was. Marion Baker, if you remember the story, was running up the stairs, saw him in the 6th floor break room drinking a Coke, asked Roy Truly, is this man supposed to be here? And Roy Truly says, yes, he works here. And Truly looks at him and says, a man shot the president. And they continued running up the stairs. Marion Baker was asked later, was Oswald out of breath? Was he pale? Was he sweating? Was he nervous looking? No, he's just sitting there drinking a Coke. Just as relaxed as a cucumber. So just because you were seen by police in the depository after the shooting doesn't mean you did the shooting. Again, that's his workplace. And the shooting didn't come. Nobody said the shooting came from the 2nd floor. That's where he was. And if you remember, Marion Baker and Roy Truly saw him 90 seconds after the shooting. 90 seconds is not enough time. If, let's just say, for example, Oswald did shoot him from the 6th floor, after the shooting, wiped down the gun, ran across to the other side of the 6th floor, stashed the gun behind some cardboard boxes, ran back across the floor to the stairwell, ran down 4 flights of stairs, ran into the 2nd floor break room, bought a Coke, sat down and took a swig just in time for Marion Baker to poke his head in and say, hey, is this man supposed to be here? You can't do all that in 90 seconds. And if you did try to do it, you'd be out of breath. And and of course, remember, that's his workplace. So just because he's in the building doesn't mean he shot the president. You see how weak this case is. And this is what the district attorney is saying makes it a slam dunk. The Oswald case is closed. All right. Point number 8, Marina Oswald changed her story and said Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle was missing on November 20th. If you remember the original story, Marina said, when I went out to the garage, his gun was on the shelf wrapped in the blanket. Well, they took Marina down to the police. You see her here being brought into an interrogation room. They kept her there. And after hours and hours, she did change her story on several fronts. When she first came in, she was saying her husband was innocent, the gun was there. She was basically backing up Lee. And then over time, she changed her story. Years later, we find out why she changed her story, because she wrote a book, and Marina came out eventually and flipped back to the other side and said, well, I changed my story because I was not a citizen, and they threatened to deport me back to Russia. And since my children, my children had dual citizenship because their daddy was an American citizen. She said they were going to deport me back to Russia, minus my children. They're going to put my children in foster care here in America. And that communicated to her the need to play along. So she changed her story. And when she changed her story, they rewarded her. They went out, bought her new clothes. They took her to a hairdresser, got her hair all done, got her makeup done, and then brought her out, trotted her out for the media and the cameras, and then used that as an occasion to say, "See, we told you. This is her testimony against her husband. She's giving us incriminating." They forced her into that position. So now, in a trial setting, I would not have had, as a defense attorney, I would not have had that information. We did not find out until years later when Marina Oswald wrote that book and publicly changed her story again, that had happened. Okay. So that would be a complicating part of the case right there. You'd have to explain that or find a way to explain that. Point number 9, Oswald appeared at work on November 22 carrying a package, which he claimed to be curtain rods. Well, this is an easy one. This has been a fable that has been passed along. There are all kinds of witnesses that I could call. His neighbor gave him a ride and testified later to the Warren Commission that the only thing he saw him carrying was a sack lunch. His neighbor's sister, who was standing at the window waving goodbye to her brother, he was going to work, actually it wasn't his sister, it was his wife, said that when she was asked what was Oswald carrying, she said he was carrying a bag lunch. When he got to work, one of his coworkers waiting for him on the loading dock at the Texas School Book Depository claimed later that when he got to work, all he was carrying was a sack lunch. So this curtain rod story was one of those concoctions that came from a guy who used to, who was himself arrested, or at least detained, because they found a gun on the roof of the Texas School Book Depository that came from his house. And they threatened him with the electric chair if he didn't confess. And so he said that he saw Lee Harvey Oswald carrying a long package to work that day. And when they asked Oswald about it, or when they asked him what he thought it was, when he asked Oswald about it, he said, "What?" He told me it was curtain rods. He completely made the story up, is my point. And turns out he used to work in a department store and his job was assembling curtain rods. So he just conjured something out of his mind from his own past in order to get himself off the hook. That's an interesting little side story there. But, you know, the story, there was no evidence. I just gave you three witnesses who saw him. One of them gave him a ride to work that day. And he didn't have any curtain rods. So that would be an easy one to dispute. Point number 10, after the shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald laughed loudly when told on a bus that JFK had been shot. I don't know what that proves. I guess maybe he's trying to make that sound like he had motive to want to kill JFK, wasn't sympathetic. Marina even said, my husband loved JFK. He was a big supporter of JFK. Oswald laughing loudly, you're going to have to get inside his brain and figure out what he's thinking to make that into a motive. But that's pretty weak. And then point number 11, a Dallas taxi driver took Oswald to his boarding house after the show. That's true. He did. Oswald was trying to get out of, he left after work, assuming that there was no more work that day. So he left and went to his boarding house, and he went via taxi. What does that prove? I mean, they're going to try to say, well, he was fleeing the scene. He knew that he had committed a crime. He was fleeing the scene. A counter argument to that would be, well, would you take a taxi, or wouldn't you have that worked out in advance so you can get out of Dodge quicker? Or, you just basically gave yourself up to a taxi driver to be witness against you. Why would you do that? So I don't know what that proves. Oswald, point number 12, Oswald allegedly shot and killed a Dallas cop. Okay, well, that's going to be a separate trial. And we've already established the fact that the timeline is a big problem for them. And there's all kinds of problems with that trial. In fact, that would have been an interesting scenario. Which case would have been tried first? Because if the Tippit murder is tried first and Oswald is found innocent of that, boy, that throws into doubt a lot of the evidence that they thought they had lined up against him for the assassination. I mean, and we discussed the Tippit situation. They're going to say, well, he witnesses put him at the scene. Well, that's not true. The witnesses were inconclusive on the closest witness said it was two men. And remember now, in a criminal trial, it has to be beyond a shadow of a doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt. So, and then the fact that he was seen standing on the street corner waiting for a bus, and then 1 minute later, he was allegedly shooting J.D. Tippit 1 mile away. How does that happen? Okay. And then 1 minute after the shooting, he's in the Texas Theater buying a ticket and in front of the assistant manager there. How does that happen? The evidence that they said they found at the scene, nobody that was there, and they were there for 8-10 minutes before the cops got there, saw a wallet. And yet the cops said they found a wallet with 2 IDs in it, Oswald and Heidel. But nobody else saw that. And then when they were asked to produce that wallet, they couldn't. They lost it. So that's not any evidence that could be used against him. They say, well, they found 4 shells. Well, none of the witnesses saw any shells. And when the Warren Commission turned over the shells saying that this is what the Dallas police gave us, they didn't have the initials of the cop who said he found the shells. So they weren't the right shells. You can't use that evidence against him. And then, you find out, you realize that a 38 doesn't spit out its own shells. So why would there be shells on the ground? And boy, there's just so many pieces that are going to fall apart in that Tippit case that I think if they had tried that first and he'd been found not guilty of that murder, it destroys the case against him in the assassination, because that was one of the big pieces of evidence that they used, was that he killed the cop because he was trying to flee the scene after he assassinated the president. Well, if he didn't kill the cop and a trial finds him innocent of that, then there's a big chunk of the motive that had him arrested to begin with. He was a cop killer, but now he's not a cop killer. So it throws into doubt anyway a lot of. So to include that as a point that proves that the Oswald is guilty and the Oswald case is closed, it doesn't prove anything. You have to prove these things in a court of law. You can't just stand up and say stuff. A witness saw Oswald enter the Texas Theater. Well, that's true. He did. And eventually they find him there. Again, what does that prove? At the time of his arrest, Oswald drew his pistol and attempted to shoot a Dallas cop. Okay, this is a piece of evidence that you're going to have to, as a defense attorney, you're going to have to find out if this really happened. Because remember now, we talked about this earlier, he was yelling out, "I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest." And yet, according to the Dallas police, he pulled his pistol and was trying to shoot a Dallas cop. Later, when we get to what happened in that Texas theater, I'm going to establish what I believe happened, and that was that he was supposed to have been shot and killed in the arrest, so that Jack Ruby's not even needed. And that's why, and he knew that. And that's why he was yelling out, I am not resisting arrest, just so there's a lot of people in that room. And if somebody had shot him and he was yelling that, the police would not have been able to explain that. Now, for them to say he had pulled his pistol and he was attempting to shoot a Dallas cop, it completely contradicts what he's saying. Because clearly, if he is pulling his pistol and shooting it, he is resisting arrest. So everyone heard him say what he said. Only the cops right next to him said that he drew his pistol and attempted to shoot a Dallas cop. After all I've learned about the Dallas police and all the lies that have been told, I mean, let's face it. Pretty sure they planted a wallet at the scene of J.D. Tippett's murder, and they got caught when they were asked for it and couldn't explain where it was. Pretty sure they planted 4 shells at the site of J.D. Tippett's murder, and then when they realized, oh, a 38 doesn't spit out its shells, and then the shells turn up missing, and the Warren Commission provides shells that are not the originals, so-called originals. I'm pretty sure they planted all that, the shells, the wallet. So that kind of tells you what the Dallas police are doing. They're planting evidence. All right, the word has gone out that Oswald is the guy, he's the assassin, and just to make sure, they're planting a little bit of evidence here, a little bit of evidence there, just to make it open and shut. So if they are willing to plant evidence at the site of J.D. Tippett's murder, why wouldn't they also say, oh, he drew his pistol and was trying to shoot us at the Texas Theater? I mean, what you're going to find as we go through this is that the conspirators who are now in full cover-up mode go too far. They go too far so many times in this case. It's overkill, especially when you get to the issue of all the sightings of Oswald before the assassination, all the doppelgangers, all the guys, the body doubles that were laying a trail of incriminating evidence, all pointing back at Oswald, knowing that later it'll come up after the assassination and make him look guilty. But sometimes they do it, they overdo it, and they have 2 Oswald sightings at the same time at 2 different locations. And so then well, it can't be the same guy. It can't be Oswald. There's two of them. So someone's out there uh, pretending to be Oswald, signing his name as Oswald, claiming his name as Oswald, saying his name is Oswald, making a scene, drawing attention to himself, laying a trail of incriminating evidence, and it's clearly not Oswald. And it got messy, is my point. They tried too hard. And that in and of itself alerted people to the fact that this wasn't legit. And it was too convenient. It was too obvious, some of this. And so I question this whole thing about him drawing his pistol at the same time he's yelling out, "I am not resisting arrest." Uh, I believe that "I am not resisting arrest" declaration because the assistant manager heard him say it. And the assistant manager has no dog in this fight. And everything he has said is borne out to be true. The guys who said he tried to pull a pistol were the Dallas cops. I don't believe them. I mean, I just flat out don't believe them. So it comes down to credibility of the witness in that case. And then lastly, a map of Dealey Plaza and the bullet's proposed trajectory was allegedly discovered in Oswald's possession. That was never produced. They said they found in his pocket a map of Dealey Plaza, and it had tracer marks on it where the bullet would hit the president. They announced this publicly. And of course, in a trial, you're going to have to produce this. It was just like the wallet. It just disappeared. So what happens is these police officers make these grand declarations when, Oswald's dead. And here's Henry Wade, the district attorney, doing the same thing. And they don't have to produce anything. They can just say it. And people are like, "Oh, did you hear? Oh, did you hear?" And it just makes Oswald look terrible. It makes him look guilty. But in a courtroom, I just went through 15 items and there was only like 2 of them that would be tricky at all for the defense attorney. 13 of them, you just throw them out, no problem. It'd be very easy to get rid of them. So the prosecution's case was very weak. And for Henry Wade to come out and say, "Oh, he's guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, the Oswald case is closed." And but now understand the context that he's saying this. He's saying this because he got his marching orders from the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, who said, "We must convince the American people that Oswald is guilty, number one, that he didn't have any Confederates, no conspiracy, and number 3, at a trial, he would have been convicted." Well, here comes Henry Wade. Technically, Nicholas Katzenbach is his boss. So here comes Henry Wade falling on his sword, doing uh, you know, doing what he was told to do. And the American people lapped it up. And this becomes the pretext of the Warren Commission, which then hammers home the point, those 3 points. Again, those are the three conclusions of the Warren Commission. And then it gets printed in the history books and all the books and the movies. And that becomes that's the conventional wisdom. That's the story. And there's no trial. None of it had to be proven. So the question whether Oswald is assassin or patsy never really got answered. And I think, again, Jack Ruby killing him the way he did was a little bit of overkill again, which they do time and again. And that is what convinced a lot of the American people to take a second look at this and think, not sure what they're saying is completely true. And then as time goes on and all the evidence that gets released is evidence that instead of incriminating Oswald tends to help his case. It's interesting. It's all one-sided. The evidence that has emerged after the Warren Commission, whether it be in government drops of documents, whether it be in witness testimony or cases, subsequent cases or investigations like the House Select Committee or Jim Garrison's investigation or the church hearings or even the civil case where Marina Lorenz comes out and tells the story of Jack Ruby. We'll get into that and how the CIA was involved in this whole thing. All of the evidence subsequent to that weekend is in Oswald's favor. None of it incriminates him. So again, I go back to my original, If you look at the heading on this channel, it has that quote by Mark Twain. A lie goes around the world before the truth gets out of town. So the lie came out immediately within the hours and short days after the assassination. The lie was the cover story that Oswald did it. Oswald was a communist. Oswald went to Russia. Oswald hated JFK. Oswald bought a gun. Oswald, he worked in this building overlooking the motorcade. He was seen in the building. He fled the scene. He shot a cop. I mean, all this evidence came out in the hours and days afterwards, and then he's dead. And there's no trial, and everybody just wipes their hands and walks away. And it wasn't until you start to give a little time and the evidence, new evidence starts coming out, and even old evidence that got covered up is now coming out. And in the exculpatory evidence, nobody in American none of the American people knew any of the exculpatory evidence. We didn't find that out till years later. Now in a trial, we didn't find it out right then, but there is no trial. So I believe, and I hope to be able to demonstrate this as we continue on, that this is evidence of a government cover story that was prepared in advance to incriminate him, and it did. And then before there could be a trial where any of it could be unwound or contradicted, they had him killed. So there's no trial. So that's, and you look at this picture and you see what at that time was the most wanted man in America. This is why the rush to judgment is so dangerous. And you really have to take with a grain of salt what you're told in the immediate aftermath of any event like this. And that's anything where the government's involved, because they always have a story and they've prepped it in advance. That's one thing I've learned. These are not, they have dry runs. They prepare these in advance. They work through all the scenarios and they figure out what story is best for them and worse for this guy. And that's the story they put out. And if you just buy everything that you're told, this is the beginning of Americans starting to suspect that the government's been lying to them. Because over the years, as the truth has come out about the JFK assassination, it hasn't been on the side of what the government cover story. It's actually hurt the government cover story. And so that trust that the American people had, the American government, that they were being told the truth, has been chipped away at over time. And now we're in a generation now where we question everything. But it started in '63 with this proclamation that Lee Harvey Oswald was A, the assassin, B, had no Confederates, no conspiracy, and C, would have been convicted at trial if there had been a trial. And we find out over time, none of those three are true. The government lied about all three. So that is this episode number 12. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe to my channel or hit the notification bell. And if you liked, enjoy what you're listening to, give me a thumbs up, and I would appreciate it. Until next time, have a good day.